January 14th, 2019, 5:47 a.m., Alaska State Prison, Fairbanks. Temperature -18 degrees Fahrenheit.
4 hours. That was all the time I had left before they strapped me to the stretcher and injected lethal chemicals into my veins. Sitting on the edge of my concrete bunk in Block D, I stared at my hands in the dim fluorescent light, listening to the sound of the wind outside. The Alaskan winter was particularly harsh this week. A severe snowstorm had dumped nearly a meter of snow on Fairbanks, and the temperature had dropped to 18 degrees below zero. But I couldn't feel the cold anymore. After spending 7 years waiting to die, your body stops trying to perceive discomfort. You just focus on the ticking clock. I could sense someone approaching me, calling my name aloud. I didn't lift my head. I knew who it was before Warden Richardson appeared at my cell door, his worn face visible through the small window frame. He was a man in his late 50s, tall, with short, military-style silver hair and deep lines around his eyes. These lines came from having accompanied too many death row inmates until their final moments. In his grey eyes, there was a professional distance and something else, perhaps regret, but he would never admit it. The steel door opened with the buzz of the electronic lock. Richardson and 2 guards in dark blue uniforms stood in the corridor, hands on their belts, watching me. "Morgan," said Richardson in his deep voice, "it's time to make your final request. If you love true stories of loyalty, justice, and redemption under the most challenging circumstances, start following Arctic Wolf Legends now, and comment with your time zone. We love hearing from our community around the world. Now, let's continue." I slowly raised my head and met his gaze. "I want to see Ghost," I said without hesitation. "One last time. That's all I ask." Richardson's eyebrows raised slightly, the first genuine look of surprise I'd seen on his face in years. "Ghost?" he repeated. "The wolf?" "Yes, sir. My wolf." A long silence fell. Richardson shifted his weight. He was probably expecting me to ask for one last meal, maybe to call a relative, maybe to see a priest. That's what death row inmates usually asked for. But I wasn't like most men, and Ghost wasn't an ordinary animal. "Morgan, do you understand what you're asking?" Richardson said carefully. "That animal has been living at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center outside Denali for 7 years. There's a blizzard, the roads are nearly impassable, and—" "I know where Ghost is," I interrupted. "I've known since the day they took him from me. I realize it's difficult, but this is my last request, Director. You said I could have one. This is it." Richardson studied my expression for a long moment, then gave a short nod. "I'll make the necessary arrangements. It will take time to arrange the transfer, maybe an hour, maybe an hour and a half. You'll be able to spend 15 minutes with the animal in the exercise yard." "Thank you," I said quietly. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Morgan, that wolf saved your life once before. When you found him as a pup, freezing in the woods behind the cabin, you raised him, trained him. I read the file. What I don't understand is why you kept a wild animal instead of a normal dog." "Ghost was never wild," I replied, looking at the small barred window behind Richardson. "He was one of the family, and sometimes family can be stronger than blood ties." Richardson slowly shook his head, his expression changing, then walked away from me without saying a word. He slammed the cell door shut. I was left alone with my thoughts again. 90 minutes. I had 90 minutes before I would see those ice-blue eyes again, that magnificent white coat, that intelligent gaze that saw everything, remembered everything. Ghost was there the night Sarah died. He had fought the real killer and had wounds on his body that proved it. Yet somehow, I was the one in the death cell, while the monster who had truly killed my wife roamed free, honored with awards and promotions. But that was about to change. I could feel it in my bones, the same instinct that had kept me alive through 7 years in this frozen hell. Ghost remembered. Animals never forget the scent of evil. 83 minutes later, 2 guards escorted me down the long corridor toward the exercise yard. I was shackled at the wrists and ankles, the chains clinking with each shuffling step, but they'd given me an insulated coat over my orange jumpsuit, a small mercy in the brutal cold. The prison was eerily quiet this early in the morning, most inmates still asleep in their cells. Only the night shift guards were around, sipping coffee and watching us pass with tired, indifferent eyes. We passed through 3 security checkpoints, each one requiring biometric scans and radio confirmation. At the final checkpoint, a young guard I didn't recognize, couldn't have been more than 25, gave me a long look as he opened the reinforced door. "You're the guy who gets to see the wolf," he said, curiosity evident in his voice. "That's right." "Man, I hope it's worth it," he muttered, shaking his head. "Seems like a waste of a last request if you ask me." One of my escorts, an older guard named Daniel, who'd always treated me with quiet respect, shot the young guard a warning glare. "Nobody asked you, Stevens. Open the door." The heavy steel door swung open, and a blast of Arctic air hit me like a physical force. I squinted against the brightness of snow, reflecting weak morning sunlight. The exercise yard was a rectangular space about 50 yards long, surrounded by 20-foot concrete walls, topped with coils of razor wire. Fresh snow covered everything in a pristine white blanket, unmarked except for a single set of tire tracks leading to a large dark vehicle parked near the far gate. The vehicle made me feel uneasy. It was a black Suburban with tinted windows and government plates, the kind of SUV used by prosecutors and government officials. Leaning against the hood, arms crossed, wearing an expensive charcoal-colored wool coat and leather gloves, stood the man who had brought me here, Prosecutor William Hartley. Even from 40 feet away, I recognized him. That self-important look, his head tilted back slightly, as if surveying his personal kingdom. Hartley was in his early 50s, his perfectly styled dark hair streaked with distinguished grey at the temples, a strong jawline, and cold grey eyes that had stared at me from across the courtroom 7 years ago as he painted me as a monster. He was ruthless during my trial. His closing argument, recounting Sarah's brutal murder and pointing at me with theatrical conviction, was a masterpiece of manipulative rhetoric that brought the jury to tears. "That man," Hartley had declared, his voice ringing through the courtroom, "that man butchered his beautiful wife in their own home, then tried to blame it on a phantom intruder. The evidence is overwhelming. The blood on his hands, the weapon in his possession, the complete lack of any other suspect. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, justice demands that James Morgan pay the ultimate price for his heinous crime." The jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict. Hartley had personally attended every hearing afterward, every appeal, making sure his case stayed airtight. And now, on the morning of my execution, here he was again, wanting to witness the final chapter. Daniel noticed me staring at Hartley and said quietly, "He showed up 20 minutes ago, insisted on being present for your last request, said it was his right as the prosecutor on your case." "Of course he did," I muttered. The sound of a truck engine made us all turn toward the main gate. A wildlife transport vehicle, a heavy-duty pickup with a reinforced cage in the bed, was rolling slowly through the security checkpoint, its tires crunching through the packed snow. My heart began to pound. Ghost was here. The transport truck pulled into the yard and stopped about 20 feet from where I stood with my guards. The driver, a woman in her 40s wearing a Wildlife Services parka, climbed out and walked to the back of the truck. She pulled down the tailgate, and I heard a sound that sent chills down my spine, a low, rumbling growl that resonated from deep within the cage. "Easy, Ghost," the woman said softly. "Easy now." She unlocked the cage door and stepped back. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a massive white shape emerged from the shadows of the cage, moving with cautious, predatory grace. Ghost. 7 years had aged him, but he was still magnificent. He stood nearly 3 feet tall at the shoulder, weighing at least 140 pounds of pure muscle beneath that thick white winter coat. His fur had lost some of its youthful luster and was now marked with scars, a long, ragged line across his right shoulder, a notch missing from his left ear, and I knew without seeing it that his right hind leg still carried the limp from that terrible night. But his eyes, those pale blue eyes, were exactly as I remembered, intelligent and fierce and hauntingly beautiful. The wildlife officer clipped a heavy-duty leash to Ghost's collar and led him forward slowly. Ghost's blue eyes scanned the yard, taking in the armed guards, the concrete walls, the strange surroundings. His ears were pricked forward, alert, his body tense. "You've got 15 minutes, Richardson's voice came from behind me. He'd appeared at some point, watching from the doorway. "Officer Santos will maintain control of the animal at all times." I took a shuffling step forward, the chains on my ankles clinking. "Ghost!" I called softly. "Hey boy, it's me!" The white wolf's head snapped in my direction. For one perfect moment, our eyes locked, and I saw recognition flash in those blue depths. Ghost's ears came forward, his tail lifted slightly. And then something changed. His posture shifted. The fur along his spine slowly rose, hackles lifting into a ridge of white spikes. His lips curled back, revealing impressive fangs, and a deep, guttural growl rolled from his throat, a sound of pure aggression that I'd only heard twice in all the years I'd known him. But Ghost wasn't looking at me. His gaze had shifted past my shoulder, fixed on something behind me with laser focus. The growl intensified, turning into a series of sharp, threatening barks. I turned, confused, and saw that Ghost was staring directly at William Hartley. The prosecutor had straightened up from his casual lean against the Suburban, and for just a second, I saw something flicker across his face. Was it recognition? Fear? But then his expression smoothed into irritation, and he took a few steps closer to us, hands in his coat pockets. "Problem with the animal?" Hartley called out, his voice dripping with disdain. "Maybe you should have requested something less dangerous for your final wish, Morgan." Ghost lunged forward with such explosive force that Officer Santos nearly lost her grip on the leash. The wolf's snarls had become savage, his entire body coiled like a spring, every instinct screaming to attack. Santos planted her feet and hauled back on the leash with both hands, her face strained with effort. "Whoa! Ghost, no!" she shouted. "Down! Down!" But Ghost wasn't obeying. His focus was absolute, his aggression entirely directed at Hartley, and something about the wolf's behavior triggered a memory in my mind, a fragment from 7 years ago that I'd never quite been able to piece together. The night Sarah died, I'd come home from a late shift at the engineering firm where I worked. It was past midnight, winter dark, snow falling softly. I'd opened the front door of our cabin, expecting warmth and the smell of whatever Sarah had cooked for dinner. Instead, I'd found chaos, furniture overturned, blood on the kitchen floor, and Sarah's body lying in a spreading pool of red. I'd collapsed beside her, screaming her name, trying to stop the bleeding even though I could see it was too late. The knife wounds were too many, too deep. She was already gone. The police had arrived within 12 minutes of my 911 call. But Ghost hadn't been there. Our wolf, who never left Sarah's side when I was away, was nowhere to be found. It wasn't until the next evening, nearly 24 hours later, that he'd limped out of the woods behind our cabin, covered in blood, his right hind leg torn open, dragging himself through the snow toward our door. The police had seen the blood on Ghost, matched it to Sarah's type, and declared it proof of my guilt. "The dog witnessed you kill your wife," the detective had said coldly. "Got in the way. Maybe tried to protect her, and you injured him. That's why he ran off. He was afraid of you." I'd tried to explain that Ghost was protecting Sarah from someone else, that he'd fought the real killer, but the investigators had found shreds of fabric caught in Ghost's teeth that matched Sarah's nightgown. Case closed, in their minds. The blood on Ghost, the fabric in his teeth, no evidence of any intruder. It all pointed to me. Except now, watching Ghost's violent reaction to Hartley, I suddenly understood. The wolf hadn't been reacting to me 7 years ago. He'd been reacting to the killer, and he remembered. "Let him go," I said suddenly, my voice cutting through the cold air. Officer Santos shot me a shocked look. What? Absolutely not. This animal is aggressive and— Please, I said, my eyes locked on Hartley's face, watching the prosecutor's expression shift from annoyance to something that looked almost like nervousness. Just for a minute. Let him go. If Ghost wanted to attack me, he'd be focused on me, but he's not. He's focused on Prosecutor Hartley. That's ridiculous, Hartley snapped, but he took a step backward toward his Suburban. The wolf is clearly disturbed. Morgan, you're wasting everyone's time with this circus. Just say your goodbye to the animal so we can proceed with justice. Justice. The word hit me like a slap. Here was a man talking about justice while Ghost, an animal who'd been there the night of Sarah's murder, who'd fought someone and come home injured and bloody, was trying to tear him apart. Warden, I said, turning to Richardson, something's wrong here. Ghost was trained from a pup. He's never aggressive toward people unless there's a threat. Never. In 7 years of living with me and Sarah, he never once showed aggression to anyone, not even strangers. But right now, he's ready to kill Prosecutor Hartley. Why? What does Ghost know that we don't? Richardson's eyes narrowed. He looked from me to Ghost, to Hartley, his lawman's instincts clearly working. Hartley, maybe you should step back into your vehicle. I'm not afraid of a damn wolf, Hartley shot back, but his voice had risen half an octave. He was definitely nervous now. This is absurd. Morgan's playing psychological games, trying to delay the inevitable. Officer Santos's grip slipped. It happened in a split second. Her gloves couldn't maintain their hold on the leash as Ghost made another powerful lunge, and suddenly, 140 pounds of enraged white wolf was free and charging across the snow-covered yard directly at William Hartley. Hartley's facade crumbled. He screamed, a high-pitched sound of pure terror, and tried to run for his Suburban. But Ghost was faster. The wolf covered the distance in 4 massive bounds and launched himself at the prosecutor, hitting Hartley in the chest and driving him backward into the snow. Guards were shouting, running forward. Hartley was screaming, his arms up protecting his face and throat. Ghost's jaws clamped down, not on Hartley's neck, but on his right forearm, biting through the expensive wool coat with savage force. "Get it off! Get it off me!" Hartley shrieked. 3 guards reached them and hauled Ghost back, the wolf's jaws still locked on Hartley's arm. I heard fabric tearing, saw the prosecutor's coat sleeve rip completely away, and then Officer Santos had Ghost's leash again and was pulling him back with help from Daniel and another guard. Hartley scrambled to his feet, his face white with shock and pain, cradling his right arm. His coat was ruined, the sleeve torn completely off, and beneath it his shirt was also shredded. But what made everyone freeze, what made my heart skip a beat, was what we could all see on Hartley's exposed right forearm. A scar, long, ugly, and unmistakable. It ran from just above his wrist nearly to his elbow, a ragged white line against his skin, the kind of scar that comes from deep lacerations. The kind of scar that comes from an animal bite. The Alaska morning went absolutely silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Everyone in that frozen prison yard stared at William Hartley's exposed forearm and the undeniable evidence carved into his flesh. I felt my legs go weak. 7 years. 7 years of sitting in a cell, waiting to die for a crime I didn't commit. And the proof of my innocence had been hiding under a prosecutor's expensive sleeve this entire time. "That's a bite mark," Daniel said slowly, his voice cutting through the silence. The older guard had released Ghost's leash to Officer Santos and now stood transfixed, staring at Hartley. "That's a wolf bite. I grew up in Denali, hunted the backcountry with my father. I've seen bite scars like that before." Hartley jerked his arm down, trying to cover it with his remaining coat sleeve, but the damage was done. Every person in that yard had seen it. His face had gone from white to red, anger and panic warring in his expression. "This is nothing," Hartley spat, his voice shaking. "I was attacked by a wild wolf 3 years ago at my cabin up near Healy. I filed a report with Wildlife Services. This has absolutely nothing to do with Morgan's case. 3 years ago, Warden Richardson's voice was quiet but sharp as he stepped fully into the yard, letting the door slam behind him. He walked slowly toward Hartley, his eyes never leaving the prosecutor's face. "You're sure about that timeline?" "Yes, I'm certain. It was during hunting season, October or November, I don't remember exactly. The wolf came out of nowhere. I defended myself, got these wounds, went to the hospital in Fairbanks, all documented, all legitimate. But I saw something in Richardson's expression shift, a memory clicking into place. The warden stopped 3 feet from Hartley and crossed his arms. "That's interesting, prosecutor, because I remember something else. I remember 7 years ago, right after Sarah Morgan was murdered, you took medical leave, 2 weeks. You came back to work with your right arm in a cast, said you'd had a biking accident up in the mountains." Hartley's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Yes, that's right. I had multiple injuries over the years. I'm an outdoorsman. I spend time in the wilderness. Accidents happen. "Show me the scar again," Richardson ordered. "I don't have to show you anything. This is harassment, Warden. You're overstepping your authority." "Daniel," Richardson said, without taking his eyes off Hartley, "you said you recognize wolf bites. How old would you estimate that scar is?" The older guard moved closer, squinting at Hartley's arm before the prosecutor could fully cover it again. "Hard to say exactly, but that's an old wound, healed for years. The scar tissue is fully settled, colors faded. I'd say at least 5 years, probably more like 7 or 8. No way that's from 3 years ago." "He's not a medical professional," Hartley shouted, backing toward his Suburban. "He can't make that determination." "No," Richardson agreed, "but a doctor can." The warden pulled out his cell phone, and Hartley lunged forward as if to grab it, then stopped himself, realizing how guilty the action would look. His hand trembled as he lowered it. I watched the prosecutor's face cycle through emotions, rage, fear, calculation, and I saw the exact moment he decided to try a different tactic. Hartley's expression smoothed into something that resembled his courtroom demeanor. "Warden Richardson, I understand you're caught up in the drama of the moment, but let's be rational. James Morgan is a convicted murderer scheduled for execution in less than 3 hours. He's desperate. He's grasping at straws. And now you're allowing him to create some conspiracy theory based on a scar and an aggressive wolf? This is absurd." "Then prove it," I said, my voice hoarse. The chains rattled as I took a step forward, guards tensing on either side of me. "If that scar is from 3 years ago, your medical records will show it. If it's from 7 years ago, right after Sarah died, your records will show that too. Let's find out which one is the truth." Hartley's jaw clenched. "I don't have to prove anything to you, Morgan. You're a dead man walking." "Maybe," I shot back, "but I'm a dead man with nothing left to lose. And that wolf," I gestured to Ghost, who Officer Santos had pulled back 20 feet, but who was still straining against the leash, still growling low in his throat, eyes locked on Hartley. Ghost came home the night Sarah was killed, covered in blood. He was wounded, limping, with shreds of fabric in his teeth. The police said it was Sarah's blood, said the fabric was from her nightgown, said Ghost was injured because I hurt him. But what if they were wrong? Richardson's phone was already at his ear. "This is Warden Richardson at Alaska State Prison. I need medical records pulled immediately for William Hartley. Date of birth." He glanced at Hartley. "What's your DOB, prosecutor?" "June 14th, 1967, Daniel supplied. "It's in the court records." Richardson repeated the information into the phone. "I need any and all records of animal bites, emergency room visits, injuries requiring casts or extended medical leave, spanning from 7 to 10 years ago. Priority request related to an active execution review. How fast can you get me that information?" There was a pause as someone spoke on the other end. Richardson's eyes narrowed. 45 minutes? Make it 30. This is urgent." He hung up and looked at Hartley. "We're going to wait right here, prosecutor. You, me, Morgan, and everyone who just witnessed what happened. We're going to wait for those records." This is illegal. Hartley's composure was cracking again. You can't detain me. I'm a state prosecutor. I have rights. And I have a duty, Richardson replied coldly. A duty to ensure the state of Alaska doesn't execute an innocent man. If you have nothing to hide, those medical records will clear this up in half an hour. So we wait. The temperature in the yard felt like it had dropped another 10 degrees. My breath came out in white clouds as I stood there, chains heavy on my wrists, watching William Hartley slowly realize he was trapped. Behind him, Ghost had finally stopped growling, but the wolf's eyes never left the prosecutor. It was the look of a predator watching prey, patient and unrelenting. Officer Santos spoke up, her voice uncertain. "Warden, I should probably get Ghost back to the transport vehicle. He's clearly agitated, and in these temperatures—" "Keep him here," Richardson interrupted. "I want that animal where we can see him." 25 minutes crawled by like 25 hours. We stood in that frozen yard, guards shifting from foot to foot, Hartley pacing near his Suburban, me trying to process what was happening. Could this really be it? After 7 years, could justice actually find me in the last hours before my execution? I thought about Sarah. God, I thought about her constantly, but standing there in that cold Alaska morning, I let myself really remember her for the first time in years. She'd been beautiful. Long dark hair, warm brown eyes, a smile that could light up our little cabin even in the darkest winter months. She'd loved the wilderness, loved the isolation of our home 15 miles outside Fairbanks. She'd been a wildlife photographer, spent her days tracking caribou herds and wolf packs through the snow, coming home with thousands of photos and stories about what she'd seen. That's how we'd found Ghost. Sarah had discovered him as a pup, barely 8 weeks old, whimpering beside his dead mother in the woods. She'd brought him home, and we'd raised him together, never quite taming him but earning his trust and loyalty. Ghost had been our family, the child we'd never had. And when Sarah was murdered, they'd taken Ghost away as evidence. I'd never seen him. After that night, never knew where they'd taken him. Until I'd made some calls from prison and learned he'd been transferred to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. They'd kept him alive because he was evidence. They'd kept him in a cage for 7 years because of me. "Mr. Richardson?" A young guard approached from the prison entrance, holding a tablet. "The hospital just transmitted the files you requested. They're marked urgent." The warden took the tablet, his weathered fingers swiping through screens. The yard went silent again, except for the wind and Ghost's heavy breathing. I watched Richardson's face as he read, saw his eyebrows draw together, saw his jaw tighten. "According to this," Richardson said slowly, looking up at Hartley, "you were admitted to Fairbanks Memorial Hospital on January 19th, 2012. That's 7 years ago, almost to the day. 7 years ago this week." Hartley said nothing. His face had gone pale again. "The diagnosis was," Richardson scrolled down, "multiple deep lacerations to the right forearm, injury pattern consistent with large canine bite, extensive tissue damage, infection risk high. You were prescribed heavy antibiotics and pain medication. You were also given a tetanus shot and advised to file a report with Wildlife Services about the attack." "There," Hartley said, grasping at the information. "See? It's documented. I was attacked by a wild animal. That proves—" "Did you file a report with Wildlife Services?" Richardson interrupted. Silence. "According to these notes," the warden continued, "you specifically refused to file a report when the hospital staff offered to submit one on your behalf. The attending physician noted here, patient declined to report animal attack despite recommendations. Patient insisted attack was minor and doesn't want animal hunted down." Richardson lowered the tablet. Why would a prosecutor, a man who built his career on law and order, refuse to report a dangerous wild animal attack? I saw Hartley's throat work as he struggled to find an answer. I didn't want the animal killed. It was just defending its territory. I was the one who wandered too close. I'm not a monster, Warden. I believe in conservation." Conservation, Richardson repeated flatly. You believe in conservation. That's your explanation. Yes. Then explain this. The warden held up the tablet. The date Sarah Morgan was murdered was January 17th, 2012. You were admitted to the hospital with wolf bite wounds on January 19th, 2 days later. You took medical leave starting January 20th and didn't return to work until February 5th. During that entire time, you had your arm in a cast and bandaged. Multiple colleagues noted in court depositions that you seemed shaken and not yourself when you returned. My heart was hammering so hard, I thought it might burst through my chest. I took a step forward, chains rattling. Sarah was killed on the night of January 17th. Ghost disappeared that same night and came home on the 18th, covered in blood, wounded, limping, with fabric in his teeth. You showed up at a hospital on the 19th with wounds that match a wolf attack. Hartley's hands were shaking now. Coincidence? This is all circumstantial. Is it? Richardson's voice had gone cold as the Arctic wind. Let me walk through what I think happened. You went to the Morgan cabin on the night of January 17th. Maybe you had feelings for Sarah. Maybe there was some other connection. But something happened that night. Something that ended with Sarah Morgan dead and you fighting off her wolf. That's insane. Ghost bit you, I said, my voice breaking. He bit you defending Sarah. That's his blood under her fingernails, yours. That's why he came home injured and bloody. That's why he had fabric in his teeth. And that fabric wasn't from Sarah's nightgown, was it? It was from your clothes. Prove it, Hartley screamed. You can't prove any of this. The evidence was analyzed 7 years ago. The blood on the wolf was typed to Sarah Morgan's blood type. Blood type, yes, Richardson said quietly. But did they do a DNA analysis? The question hung in the frozen air like a guillotine blade. I saw Hartley's face drain of all color. I saw him realize his mistake. Oh my God, Officer Santos whispered. They only did blood typing in 2012. DNA analysis wasn't standard for animal evidence back then. It was too expensive, and the case seemed open and shut. Richardson was already dialing his phone again. I need the state crime lab, now. We need to retest evidence from case number. He rattled off my case number from memory. Blood samples taken from a wolf 7 years ago. Full DNA analysis, and I need it fast. That'll take weeks, Hartley protested. You're scheduled to execute Morgan in 2 hours. You can't delay an execution based on speculation, and I can delay anything I damn well please when new evidence suggests we might be executing an innocent man. Richardson cut him off. Daniel, call the Attorney General's office. Tell them we have a situation. Stevens, get the deputy warden out here. And someone get me... Wait! The shout came from Hartley. He was backing toward his Suburban now, moving faster. Wait, you can't! This is all wrong. You're making a terrible mistake. Morgan is... Guilty. The evidence was solid. The jury convicted him. He was reaching for his vehicle door. Richardson noticed at the same moment I did. Stop him! The warden shouted. Guards rushed forward, but Hartley was already yanking the driver's door open. He threw himself inside, and I heard the engine roar to life. The Suburban's tires spun in the snow for a moment before catching traction. Block the gate! Richardson ordered, but it was too late. The gate was still open from when the transport truck had entered, and Hartley's Suburban was accelerating toward it. That's when Ghost moved. Officer Santos had been distracted by the commotion, her grip on the leash loose. The white wolf tore free with one powerful yank and sprinted across the snow-covered yard with terrifying speed. Not toward Hartley's vehicle, toward the back of it. Ghost! No! Santos screamed. But Ghost wasn't attacking. He was running to the Suburban's rear end, and as the vehicle fishtailed through the gate, Ghost changed direction in mid-stride and launched himself at the back of the SUV. His claws scrabbled against the rear window, his teeth found purchase on the spare tire cover, and he held on as Hartley's vehicle accelerated out of the prison yard. Jesus Christ, someone breathed. Richardson was already running for his own vehicle, a prison-issue pickup truck parked near the entrance. Everyone in! We're pursuing. Daniel, call state police. Tell them we have a fleeing suspect and request backup." The next few minutes were chaos. I was bundled into the back of Richardson's truck, still in chains, with 2 guards flanking me. Officer Santos jumped in as well, her face stricken with worry about Ghost. Richardson drove with grim determination, following the tire tracks in the fresh snow that led from the prison toward the highway. A half-mile ahead, I could see Hartley's black Suburban weaving erratically, and clinging to the back of it was a flash of white. Ghost, somehow still holding on, despite the speed and the freezing wind. "He's going to get himself killed," Santos said, her voice anguished. But I knew Ghost. That wolf had survived gunshot wounds and stab wounds. He'd survived 7 years in captivity. He was doing what he'd always done, protecting the truth, protecting me, protecting Sarah's memory. Hartley's Suburban suddenly swerved hard, trying to shake Ghost loose. The wolf's body swung out wide, but his jaws remained locked on the tire cover. The SUV corrected, accelerated, then made another violent swerve. This time, Ghost lost his grip. I watched in horror as the white wolf tumbled across the snowy highway, rolling end over end, a blur of fur and limbs. The Suburban kept going, its brake lights never flickering. "Stop!" I screamed. "Stop the truck! Ghost!" Richardson slammed on the brakes, and our vehicle skidded to a halt. I was out before anyone could stop me, chains and all, stumbling through the snow toward where Ghost had fallen. He was lying on his side 30 feet from the road, his white coat barely distinguishable from the snow around him. "Ghost!" I fell to my knees beside him, my chained hands reaching out to touch his head. His eyes were closed, blood seeped from a gash on his shoulder. But his chest was moving, shallow breaths, but breathing. "He's alive," Santos said, dropping down beside me with a medical kit. "Oh, thank God he's alive." Officer Santos worked quickly, her hands steady despite the freezing temperature. She cleaned Ghost's wounds, checking his legs, his ribs, running her fingers through his thick white coat, looking for breaks or internal injuries. The wolf remained still, conscious now but dazed, his ice-blue eyes half open and unfocused. "Possible concussion," Santos murmured. "Definitely bruised ribs, maybe cracked. This shoulder laceration needs stitches. But he's stable. Damn lucky to be alive after a fall like that." I kept my shackled hands on Ghost's head, feeling the warmth of him, the reality of him. After 7 years of separation, after believing I'd never see him again, here he was, injured but alive, still fighting for me even when it could cost him everything. "We need to move," Richardson said, standing over us with his phone pressed to his ear. "State police have units converging on Highway 3. Hartley's vehicle was spotted heading north toward Denali. They've got a roadblock being set up at mile marker 47. "Can Ghost be moved?" I asked Santos. She nodded. "Carefully. We need to get him warm and to a vet, but he can travel." Between Santos, Daniel, and another guard, they lifted Ghost gently and carried him to Richardson's truck. They laid him across the back seat, and I climbed in beside him, my chains making the movement awkward. Ghost's head came to rest on my lap, and I felt his body shudder with each breath. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, stroking his ears the way I used to when he was a pup. "You did good. You did so good." Richardson gunned the engine, and we took off down the highway, following Hartley's tire tracks through the snow. The radio crackled with updates. State police had eyes on the Suburban. It was still heading north, driving recklessly, running speeds of 70 miles per hour on icy roads. "He's going to kill someone driving like that," Daniel muttered from the front seat. "He's panicking," Richardson replied. "Man's whole world just collapsed. 7 years of living with what he did, thinking he got away with it, and now it's all falling apart." I looked down at Ghost, and suddenly something clicked in my memory. "Warden," I said urgently. "Ghost didn't just attack Hartley randomly. He was trying to get into the Suburban, into the trunk specifically. Remember? He was clawing at it, biting at it, before Hartley tried to run." Richardson's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. "You think there's something in that vehicle?" Ghost was a tracking wolf, Sarah trained him to find things, to follow scents. If he was that, desperate to get into Hartley's trunk. I trailed off, my mind racing. What if there's evidence? What if Hartley kept something from that night? Why would he keep evidence? Santos asked. Trophy, I said quietly. Serial killers do it. Murderers do it. Sometimes they can't help themselves. They keep something from their crime to relive it, to remember. Sarah was wearing a silver locket the night she died. It was an antique, belonged to her grandmother. After she was killed, the police never found it. They assumed the killer took it during the robbery, except there was no robbery. Nothing else was taken from the cabin. Richardson was already on the radio. All units, suspect's vehicle may contain evidence related to a 7-year-old homicide. When apprehended, secure the vehicle and do not let the suspect near the trunk. Repeat, secure the trunk and preserve any potential evidence. The chase lasted another 10 minutes. We crested a hill and saw the roadblock ahead. 3 state police cruisers positioned across both lanes, light bars flashing red and blue against the white landscape. Hartley's Suburban was stopped 50 yards short of the roadblock, sideways across the highway, driver's door hanging open. "Where is he?" Daniel said, scanning the area. Then I saw movement, a dark figure running across the snowy field to the left of the highway, stumbling and falling, getting up, running again. Hartley had abandoned his vehicle and was trying to flee on foot into the wilderness. He wouldn't get far, not in this terrain, not in this cold, not with state troopers already in pursuit. I watched 2 officers sprint after him, their boots kicking up powder snow, while 2 more approached the abandoned Suburban with weapons drawn, clearing it to make sure no one else was inside. Richardson pulled up behind the roadblock, and we all climbed out. Ghost lifted his head weakly as I moved, and Santos stayed with him, murmuring reassurances. I shuffled forward in my chains, flanked by guards, drawn by some magnetic pull toward that black SUV sitting abandoned in the middle of the highway. A state trooper approached Richardson, a tall woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Warden Richardson? I'm Sergeant Patricia Alvarez. We got your call about the suspect. What exactly are we dealing with here?" Richardson quickly explained. The execution, Ghost's reaction, Hartley's scar, the medical records, the attempted flight. Alvarez's expression grew more incredulous with each detail. "So you're telling me William Hartley, one of the most successful prosecutors in Alaska, murdered Sarah Morgan 7 years ago and framed her husband?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Richardson replied. "And I think there's evidence in that vehicle." Alvarez looked at the Suburban, then back at Richardson. "We'll need a warrant to search it." "Exigent circumstances," Richardson countered. "Fleeing suspect, potential evidence destruction, active execution scheduled for..." He checked his watch. 90 minutes from now. "We don't have time for a warrant." Alvarez hesitated, then nodded. "Your call, Warden, but this better be solid." They approached the Suburban together. I stayed back with my guards, but close enough to see everything. Alvarez tried the trunk release button inside the vehicle. Locked. She radioed for bolt cutters. While we waited, I watched the officers across the field tackle Hartley to the ground. Even from 100 yards away, I could hear him screaming, incoherent words that the wind scattered. They cuffed him and hauled him to his feet, and I got my first clear look at his face in years. He looked nothing like the confident prosecutor who'd destroyed me in court. His expensive coat was torn, his face was scratched and bleeding from his fall, and his eyes, God, his eyes were wild, the eyes of a man who'd finally broken. An officer arrived with bolt cutters and made quick work of the trunk lock. The lid popped open with a hiss of released pressure. Inside were 2 large leather suitcases and several duffel bags, all expensive looking. Alvarez unzipped the first suitcase carefully, photographing as she went. Clothes. Men's clothes, all neatly folded. European labels, high-end brands. "He wasn't lying about planning a trip," she murmured. She moved to the second suitcase. More clothes, shoes, a leather toiletry bag. She opened the duffel bags one by one, more personal items, a laptop, file folders, what looked like financial documents. My heart sank. Maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe Ghost had just been reacting to Hartley's scent, to the man who'd wounded him 7 years ago, and there was nothing here after all. Maybe... Wait, Alvarez said. She was examining one of the duffel bags more closely, running her gloved fingers along the interior lining. There's a hidden pocket here. She worked at it carefully, finding a zipper concealed in the seam. The pocket opened, and she reached inside, pulling out something small wrapped in black cloth. Everyone leaned closer. Alvarez unwrapped the cloth slowly, and my breath caught in my throat. It was Sarah's locket. The silver was slightly tarnished with age, but I'd recognize it anywhere. An oval, antique locket on a delicate chain, with intricate engraving of flowers on the front. Sarah had worn it every single day. It had been her most precious possession. "Oh my God," Richardson breathed. Alvarez opened the locket with careful fingers. Inside was a tiny photograph, faded but still clear. Sarah's face, smiling at the camera. The photo I'd taken of her on our honeymoon in Juneau, the one she'd had specially sized to fit in the locket. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. 7 years of maintaining my innocence, 7 years of being called a liar and a monster, and here it was, proof, physical, undeniable proof that William Hartley had been there the night Sarah died, that he'd taken this locket from her body, that he'd kept it all these years. "Bag it as evidence," Alvarez said quietly to another officer. "Document everything. Photograph the hidden pocket, the locket, the photo. Chain of custody starts now." The other troopers were bringing Hartley back across the field. He was no longer screaming, no longer fighting. He walked between them like a zombie, his eyes fixed on nothing, his face blank. They brought him to the roadblock, and Alvarez stepped forward to meet them. "William Hartley," she said formally, "I'm placing you under arrest for suspicion of murder in the death of Sarah Morgan, for evidence tampering, and for obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent." "I loved her," Hartley interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I loved her so much." Everyone froze. Alvarez paused mid-Miranda rights, glancing at Richardson, who gave her a slight nod to let him continue. "I loved her since we were 20 years old," Hartley went on, his eyes distant, lost in memory. "We were in the same pre-law program at University of Alaska Anchorage. She was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Brilliant, passionate about wildlife and nature and justice. I thought we were meant to be together." He looked up, and his gaze found me for the first time. "But she chose you. You, with your engineering degree and your quiet life. And your cabin in the woods. She chose simple over sophisticated. She chose you over me." "So you killed her," I said, my voice shaking with barely contained rage. "Because she didn't want you, you stabbed her to death in her own home." "I didn't mean to." Hartley's composure shattered like ice. "I went to talk to her, that's all. Just to talk. I'd heard you were having problems. I thought maybe she'd finally see that she made a mistake marrying you. But she laughed at me. She laughed and said there'd never been anything between us, that I'd imagined our connection, that she'd never felt anything for me." His voice rose, becoming manic. "She said I was pathetic, that my obsession was sick. She told me to leave and never come back. And something in me just snapped. I saw the knife on the counter, and I grabbed it, and I don't even remember doing it. I just remember her screaming, and blood, and then that damned wolf coming out of nowhere." He touched his right arm, unconsciously, where Ghost's 7-year-old bite marks were hidden under his torn sleeve. "It attacked me, bit down on my arm and wouldn't let go. I had to fight it off, thought I'd killed it when I hit it with a fireplace poker, but it ran away, and I panicked. I knew the bite would need medical attention, knew the wolf had my DNA in its mouth, knew I'd left evidence everywhere. So you framed me," I said. "It was easy," Hartley said, and there was something horrible in his voice, pride maybe, or bitterness. "You were the obvious suspect. The husband is always the obvious suspect. I made sure the investigation focused on you from day one. Made sure the wolf's blood was typed but not DNA tested. Too expensive, I said, and we had our suspect anyway. Made sure the evidence was interpreted in a way that pointed to you. And when your public defender was incompetent, when you couldn't afford proper forensic experts, it all fell into place. You sent me to death row, I said, my voice breaking. You watched me get convicted. You watched every appeal fail. You were going to watch me die today for something you did. Yes, Hartley said simply. Because I loved her, and you took her from me. And even if I couldn't have her, at least I could make sure you paid for being the man she chose instead of me. The logic was insane, psychotic, but in Hartley's twisted mind, it made perfect sense. Sergeant Alvarez finished reading him his rights, and 2 troopers loaded him into a patrol car. He went without resistance, all the fight gone out of him, just a broken man who'd carried his terrible secret for 7 years and finally couldn't bear the weight anymore. Richardson's phone rang. He answered, listened, then his face transformed. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, relief maybe, mixed with something deeper. That was the Attorney General, he said. Based on Hartley's confession, witnessed by multiple law enforcement officers and the discovery of Sarah Morgan's locket in his possession, he's issuing an emergency stay of execution and ordering a full review of your case. Richardson paused. Morgan, you're not being executed today. The words didn't seem real. They floated in the cold air like snowflakes, too fragile to be true. What? I whispered. Your execution is stayed, indefinitely. And given the circumstances, the AG is already talking about overturning your conviction entirely. You're going to be free, Morgan. Free. The word hit me like a physical blow. My knees buckled, and Daniel caught me before I fell. 7 years. 7 years of being told I was a murderer. 7 years of waiting to die. 7 years of grief and rage and helplessness. And now... Ghost? I said suddenly, pushing away from Daniel. Where's Ghost? I need to see Ghost. I stumbled back to Richardson's truck, where Officer Santos still sat with the injured wolf. Ghost's eyes opened as I approached, those pale blue eyes focusing on my face. His tail thumped weakly against the seat. Hey boy, I said, tears streaming down my face now, freezing on my cheeks. We did it. You did it. You saved me. You saved us both. Ghost's tongue came out, licking my chained hands, and the simple gesture, the same thing he'd done 1,000 times when he was a pup, broke something inside me. I laid my head on his shoulder and cried, really cried, for the first time since the day Sarah died. Santos put a hand on my shoulder. I'm taking him to the emergency vet in Fairbanks. He needs x-rays, stitches, observation. But he's going to be okay, he's tough. Can I come with him? She glanced at Richardson, who'd followed me over. The warden looked at my chains, at the regulations he'd be breaking, at the man who'd been hours away from execution and was now possibly innocent. Yes, Richardson said firmly. He can ride with Ghost. I'll take full responsibility. The vet clinic was 25 miles away, back toward Fairbanks. Santos drove the transport truck, with Ghost and me in the back, while Richardson and a state police escort followed. I sat beside Ghost's traveling crate, my chained hands resting on the bars, watching him breathe. The wolf had saved my life twice now, once by fighting Sarah's killer and bearing the scars to prove it, and once by recognizing that killer 7 years later and refusing to let him escape. Loyalty wasn't something you could measure or quantify. It was something that lived in the heart, in the blood, in the bone-deep knowledge of who belonged to whom. At the vet clinic, Dr. Michael Chen, a young veterinarian with gentle hands and a calm demeanor, took Ghost immediately into surgery. Cracked ribs, concussion, the shoulder laceration, and some internal bruising, he reported after the initial exam. But nothing life-threatening. He'll need rest and care, but he should make a full recovery. How long before he can go home? I asked, then stopped. Home. I didn't have a home. The cabin where Sarah and I had lived had been sold years ago to pay legal fees. Dr. Chen smiled softly. 2 weeks, maybe 3. He'll need supervised care during recovery. Do you have somewhere he can stay? He'll stay at the Wildlife Center temporarily, Santos said, until Mr. Morgan's situation is resolved and he can make other arrangements. Mr. Morgan, not the prisoner, not the condemned man. Mr. Morgan. We stayed at the clinic for 3 hours while Ghost was treated. Richardson spent most of that time on his phone, coordinating with lawyers, judges, the Attorney General's office. The machinery of justice that had condemned me was now grinding into reverse, and it was both exhilarating and terrifying to watch. Finally, as afternoon light began to fade, Richardson approached me where I sat in the waiting room, still in chains, still wearing my prison jumpsuit under the borrowed coat. "Morgan," he said, "I just got word from Judge Patricia Winters. She's issuing an emergency order to vacate your conviction based on newly discovered evidence and Hartley's confession. The paperwork is being processed now. By tomorrow morning, you'll be a free man with full exoneration." "Tomorrow morning," I repeated numbly. "There's more. The state is prepared to offer you a full settlement for wrongful conviction, housing, financial compensation, assistance with reintegration, whatever you need." I looked at him, this man who'd been prepared to oversee my execution this morning and was now offering me my life back. "Thank you," I said, and the words felt impossibly inadequate. "Don't thank me," Richardson replied quietly. "Thank that wolf. Without Ghost, you'd be dead in," he checked his watch, 12 minutes. 12 minutes, that's how close I'd come. 12 minutes from being strapped to a gurney, from lethal chemicals entering my veins, from dying for a crime I didn't commit, while the real killer watched. Dr. Chen emerged from the surgical suite, pulling off his gloves. "Ghost is out of surgery and resting. You can see him if you'd like." They took off my chains, actually removed the shackles from my wrists and ankles, and I walked unrestrained into the recovery room, where Ghost lay on a padded table, his white coat clean now, his wounds bandaged, an IV line running into his front leg. His eyes were closed, his breathing slow and steady with sedation. I put my hand on his head, feeling the warmth of him, the life in him. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for remembering. Thank you for never giving up. Thank you for loving her as much as I did." Ghost's ear twitched at the sound of my voice, but he didn't wake. He was dreaming, maybe, of running through snow, of hunting caribou, of the days before everything went wrong. I hoped his dreams were good ones. That night, I slept in a hotel room for the first time in 7 years. Not a cell, not a concrete bunk with a thin mattress. A real hotel room with clean sheets and a soft bed and a window that looked out over the lights of Fairbanks. Richardson had arranged it, along with civilian clothes and basic necessities. I stood at that window for hours, watching cars drive by, watching people walk their dogs, watching normal life happen like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The news broke at 10 p.m. Every channel in Alaska was running the story. Prosecutor arrested for murder he prosecuted. Death row inmate exonerated hours before execution. Wolf's loyalty saves innocent man. My face was plastered across every screen, my old booking photo from 7 years ago, hollow-eyed and devastated, next to recent footage of me leaving the vet clinic in civilian clothes, looking dazed and overwhelmed. Sarah's photo appeared too, the same image from her locket, and seeing her face blown up on a 50-inch television screen made my chest ache. She'd been dead for 7 years, but the grief hit me fresh, like it had just happened yesterday. The news anchors talked about her like they'd known her. Talented wildlife photographer, beloved wife, tragic victim, reducing her whole beautiful, complicated life down to sound bites. And then there was Hartley, his perp walk footage playing on loop. He looked broken, diminished, Nothing like the powerful prosecutor who'd sent me to death row. The media was calling it the biggest judicial scandal in Alaska history. Lawyers were already lining up to sue the state on my behalf. Victims' rights groups were demanding investigations into how this could have happened. But I couldn't focus on any of that. All I could think about was Ghost, lying in that recovery room, and the conversation I'd had with Dr. Chen before I left the clinic. "He's old," Dr. Chen had said gently. "Not just in years, but in wear. 7 years in captivity took a toll on him. The injuries from today accelerated some existing problems. Arthritis in his hips, early-stage kidney disease, a heart murmur. With proper care, he could have 2, maybe 3 good years left. But he's not a young wolf anymore. 2 or 3 years. That's all the time Ghost and I had left together. After everything we'd been through, after 7 years of separation, we'd get maybe 3 years before I'd have to say goodbye forever." I pressed my forehead against the cold hotel window and made a silent promise to my wolf. I would make those years count. The next morning, Judge Patricia Winters officially vacated my conviction in an emergency hearing. I stood before her in a borrowed suit, flanked by a court-appointed attorney, while she read from her order in a clear, firm voice. The evidence presented in this case was fundamentally tainted by the actions of Prosecutor William Hartley, who deliberately concealed exculpatory evidence, manipulated the investigation, and committed the very crime for which Mr. James Morgan was convicted. This represents not merely a miscarriage of justice, but a deliberate corruption of the judicial process. Therefore, this court finds that Mr. Morgan's conviction for the murder of Sarah Morgan is hereby vacated. His sentence is nullified, and he is immediately released with full exoneration and restoration of all civil rights. She looked at me directly, her eyes somber. "Mr. Morgan, on behalf of the state of Alaska, I offer you our deepest apologies. No words can undo what has been done to you, but please know that we will do everything in our power to make this right." And just like that, I was free. Not pardoned, not paroled, free, exonerated, innocent. I walked out of the courthouse into a mob of reporters, cameras flashing, microphones thrust in my face, voices shouting questions all at once. Richardson and 2 state police officers formed a protective barrier around me, guiding me through the chaos to a waiting SUV. "Mr. Morgan, how does it feel to be free? Are you going to sue the state? Do you forgive William Hartley? What's the first thing you're going to do?" I stopped at that last question, turned to face the cameras, and spoke for the first time since my release. "I'm going to visit my wife's grave, and then I'm going to get my wolf and take him home." The reporters erupted with follow-up questions, but Richardson was already ushering me into the vehicle. We pulled away from the courthouse, and I watched Fairbanks scroll past the window. A city that had condemned me, watched me rot in prison, and was now calling me a hero. "Where do you want to go?" Richardson asked from the driver's seat. "Birch Hill Cemetery," I said quietly. "Sarah's buried there." The drive took 15 minutes. The cemetery was on the northern edge of Fairbanks, a peaceful place with tall spruce trees and rolling hills covered in snow. I'd never been here before. They don't let death row inmates attend funerals, but I'd seen photos Sarah's sister had sent me years ago, before she stopped returning my letters. Richardson waited in the vehicle while I walked among the headstones, reading names and dates, searching. The morning was crisp and bright, the temperature a relatively warm 10 degrees, and fresh snow from last night's fall made everything look clean and new. I found her grave in the eastern section, under a large spruce tree. The headstone was simple grey granite, elegant in its simplicity. Sarah Elizabeth Morgan, 1985-2012. Beloved wife, daughter, friend. She walked with wolves. That last line broke me. Sarah's sister must have chosen it. Sarah had always said that about herself, that she walked with wolves, that she understood them in a way most people never could. She'd understood Ghost. She'd loved him like family. I knelt in the snow in front of her grave, not caring about the cold seeping through my borrowed pants. I'd brought flowers, white roses that I'd asked Richardson to stop for. and I laid them carefully at the base of her headstone. "Hi, Sarah," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm sorry it took me so long to visit. I wanted to come. Every day for 7 years I wanted to come, but they wouldn't let me. They said I didn't deserve to say goodbye to you because I'd killed you." The words spilled out. 7 years of things I'd needed to say. "But I didn't kill you. You know that. You've always known that. And now everyone else knows it too because Ghost remembered. He never forgot what happened that night. He never forgot the man who hurt you." I touched the cold granite, tracing her name with my finger. Hartley confessed. He told them everything, that he loved you, that you rejected him, that he killed you in a rage, and then he framed me for it and watched me go to death row without a shred of remorse. But Ghost wouldn't let him get away with it. Your wolf, the pup you saved from the woods, he saved me right back. A raven called from the spruce tree above, its harsh cry echoing across the cemetery. In Alaska, ravens were considered messengers between worlds, carriers of souls. I like to think Sarah was listening somehow, wherever she was. "I'm going to get Ghost in a few weeks, once he's recovered, and I'm going to find us a place to live. Somewhere quiet like our old cabin, somewhere in the woods where he can run and hunt and be happy for whatever time he has left. And I'm going to tell him every day that you loved him, that you'd be proud of him, that he did good." I stayed at her grave for an hour, talking to her, remembering her, grieving properly for the first time. When I finally stood to leave, I noticed something. Fresh wolf tracks in the snow around her headstone, circling it protectively. My heart skipped. I looked around the cemetery, scanning the tree line, but saw nothing. Still, the tracks were there, crisp and clear in the new snow. They hadn't been there when I arrived. Wild wolves sometimes came down from the mountains, especially in winter when food was scarce. But something about these tracks felt different, felt intentional, like Sarah's spirit had sent a guardian to watch over her grave. I walked back to Richardson's SUV, and the warden raised an eyebrow at my expression. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said softly. "I think I am." 2 weeks later, Dr. Chen called to tell me Ghost was ready to be discharged. I drove to the vet clinic in my newly purchased used truck, a reliable Ford F-150 that could handle Alaska winters, and felt my palms sweating on the steering wheel. I'd been visiting Ghost every day during his recovery, but this was different. Today, I was taking him home. Home was a small cabin I'd rented 15 miles outside Fairbanks, not far from where Sarah and I had lived before. It wasn't the same cabin. I couldn't bear to go back there. But it was similar. 2 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, large windows looking out at the forest, and most importantly, 50 acres of private land where a wolf could roam. Dr. Chen met me in the lobby with a smile. He's been anxious all morning, like he knows something's happening. "Come on back." Ghost was in the recovery room, standing by the window, looking out at the snowy landscape. His shoulder wound had healed well, leaving only a pink scar under his white fur. His ribs had mended. The limp in his hind leg was still there, probably always would be. But he moved with more ease now, after 2 weeks of rest and good food. When I entered the room, Ghost's head swung toward me, and his tail began to wag, slowly at first, then faster. He limped over to me, and I dropped to my knees, wrapping my arms around his neck, burying my face in his fur. "Ready to go home, boy?" I whispered. Ghost licked my ear in response, and I laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in what felt like forever. Dr. Chen went over the care instructions. Medications for his arthritis, special food for his kidney disease, regular checkups every month. I listened carefully, committing everything to memory. Ghost was my responsibility now, my family, and I'd be damned if I let anything happen to him. We walked out of the clinic together, Ghost moving stiffly but determinedly beside me. Officer Santos was waiting outside. She'd asked to be there for Ghost's discharge, and she smiled when she saw us. "Look at you two," she said warmly, "finally together again." "Thank you," I told her, "for everything you did, for taking care of him all these years." "He was never just another wolf to me," Santos replied. "I knew there was something special about him. something loyal and true. I'm glad I was right. Ghost and I drove home together, the wolf sitting in the passenger seat, his head out the window despite the cold, his nose working to take in all the sense of freedom. When we pulled up to the cabin, he practically leaped out of the truck, despite his injuries, and immediately began exploring the property, marking territory, investigating every tree and rock and snowdrift. I watched him from the porch, and something in my chest loosened. This was right. This was how it was supposed to be. 3 months passed. Winter began to yield to early spring, though in Alaska that just meant the temperature climbed to a balmy 30 degrees. I settled into a new routine. In the mornings, I would walk in the woods behind the cabin with Ghost. In the afternoons, I would work remotely for an engineering firm that hired me without caring about my past. In the evenings, I would read books by the fire or watch Ghost sleep. The state had announced the compensation decision for my wrongful conviction. $1.2 million plus legal fees, plus an official apology from the governor. It was more money than I had imagined, but it couldn't give me back the 7 years of my life. I donated half of the money to the Innocence Project and other wrongful conviction organizations. I put the rest into a trust, into this cabin, and into Ghost's care. William Hartley's trial was set for June. His lawyers tried every legal maneuver to invalidate his confession, but Judge Winters rejected them all. He was going to prison, at least for life. Some thought he would get the death penalty for killing Sarah and pinning the crime on me. My mind was very confused about this. Part of me wanted him to suffer the same pain I had suffered. Another part of me wanted him to disappear, for his existence to be erased, so I could stop thinking about him. But today, I wasn't thinking about Hartley. Today was March 15th, and it was Ghost's birthday, or at least the day Sarah and I had designated as his birthday when we'd found him as a pup. He was 9 years old now, which meant he was getting truly elderly for a wolf. I'd made him a special meal, fresh venison from a local hunter, mixed with sweet potato and blueberries, and watched him eat with the same enthusiasm he'd had as a youngster. Afterward, we went for a long walk through the forest, Ghost moving slowly but happily, investigating every interesting scent. We ended up at a frozen creek about a mile from the cabin. Ghost sat down on the snowy bank, panting, and I sat beside him. The afternoon sun slanted through the spruce trees, turning the snow gold and pink. "You know," I said to Ghost, "I've been thinking about what happens next, for both of us." Ghost's ear swiveled toward me, listening. I'm not getting any younger either. 39 years old, 7 of them wasted, and you're not going to be around forever. Dr. Chen says you're doing well, but... I trailed off, the thought too painful to finish. Ghost leaned against my side, offering comfort the way he always had. "I think Sarah would want us to do something meaningful with the time we have left," I continued. "Something that helps others. I've been talking to some lawyers about starting a foundation, using my settlement money to help other people who've been wrongfully convicted. Maybe fund better legal representation for defendants who can't afford it. Maybe push for reforms in how animal evidence is handled in criminal cases." The idea had been growing in my mind for weeks. I had resources now, and a platform, and a story that people were paying attention to. I could use all of that to make sure what happened to me didn't happen to others. What do you think, boy? The Sarah and Ghost Foundation for Criminal Justice Reform. Too much of a mouthful? Ghost woofed softly, and I took it as approval. We sat there until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. When we finally headed back to the cabin, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had purpose again. I had Ghost. I had a future. That night, I woke to Ghost growling. It was 2 a.m. according to the clock on my nightstand, and Ghost was standing by the bedroom window, his hackles raised, that same low, threatening growl rumbling from his throat that I'd heard twice before, once the night Sarah died, and once in the prison yard when he'd seen Hartley. I sat up, instantly alert. "Ghost? What is it, boy?" The wolf didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on something outside, beyond the window, in the dark forest. I got out of bed and moved to his side, peering out into the night. At first, I saw nothing, just trees and shadows and moonlight on snow. But then, something moved. A shape detaching itself from the darkness, walking slowly toward the cabin. A person. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my phone, ready to call 911, but as the figure came closer, stepping into the pool of light from the porch lamp I'd left on, I saw it was a woman. She was tall, slender, wearing a heavy parka, her face obscured by the hood. She stopped at the edge of my property, about 50 feet from the cabin, and just stood there, waiting. Ghost's growling intensified. His body was coiled, ready to attack, and I had to put a hand on his head to keep him from launching through the window. "Easy," I murmured. "Easy, boy." I went to the front door, my heart pounding. This was insane, opening the door to a stranger at 2 a.m. in the middle of nowhere. But something compelled me forward. I opened the door, the cold air hitting me like a slap, and called out, "Can I help you?" The figure pulled back her hood, and my world tilted. It wasn't possible. The woman standing in my front yard, illuminated by the porch light, had Sarah's face. Not similar, not reminiscent. Sarah's exact face. Same dark hair, same warm brown eyes, same delicate features I'd memorized over years of marriage and 7 years of grieving. "Hello, James," she said, and even her voice was wrong. Too familiar, too much like Sarah's. Ghost was going insane behind me, barking and snarling, trying to push past my legs to get at her. I held him back with effort, my mind reeling. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "My name is Elena Morgan," the woman said calmly. "I'm Sarah's twin sister." Twin sister. "That's impossible," I said. "Sarah didn't have a twin. She had one sister, Jennifer, who looked nothing like her. I've seen photos." "Jennifer was our half-sister," Elena interrupted. "Different mother. Sarah and I shared the same parents, but we were separated as infants when our mother died. I was adopted by a family in Montana. Sarah grew up here in Alaska with our father. We didn't find each other until we were in our 20s. I stared at her, trying to process this. "Sarah never mentioned you. Never. Not once in 8 years of marriage." Elena's expression tightened with something that looked like pain. "We had a falling out. A bad one, about 6 months before she died. We hadn't spoken since. I didn't even know she was dead until last week, when I saw the news about your exoneration. I flew up from Montana as soon as I could." "Why?" I asked. "Why are you here? What do you want?" Elena took a step closer, and Ghost's barking reached a fever pitch. She stopped, eyeing the wolf warily. "I need to tell you something about Sarah," she said. "Something she made me promise never to tell anyone. But now that she's gone, now that the truth about Hartley is out, I think you need to know." "What do you know?" Elena looked me straight in the eye. "William Hartley wasn't just coincidentally obsessed with Sarah. Sarah was investigating him. There was evidence that Hartley took money from a crime syndicate to release guilty individuals. She was gathering evidence to expose him, to end his career. And 3 days before she died, she told him what she knew and gave him a chance to turn himself in." The world seemed to stop spinning. "What?" I whispered. "Hartley didn't kill Sarah because she turned him down," Elena said. "That may have been a factor, but the real reason was that Sarah was about to destroy everything he had built. His career, his reputation, his freedom, in short, everything. She was going to tell everyone that he was a corrupt prosecutor who had been working with criminals for years. That's why he killed her and pinned the crime on you, because he knew you, as her husband, would be the most obvious suspect. He killed 2 birds with 1 stone. He silenced Sarah and portrayed himself as the heroic prosecutor who brought her killer to justice." My legs gave out. I sat down hard on the porch steps, Ghost immediately pressing against my side, whining softly now instead of barking. "Where's your proof?" I managed to ask. Elena reached into her parka and pulled out a USB drive. "Sarah mailed me copies of everything 3 days before she died. Said if anything happened to her, I should make sure the truth came out. But I was angry at her, angry about our fight, and when she died, I thought you'd really killed her. So I kept the drive hidden, couldn't bear to look at it. But now, she held out the USB drive, and I took it with trembling fingers. There are financial records there, Elena continued, records of phone calls, emails between Hartley and known criminals. Everything Sarah gathered during her 6-month investigation. With these and Hartley's confession to the murder, you can make sure he disappears forever. And we can expose the entire corrupt network he was part of. I looked at the small drive in my palm, this little piece of plastic and metal containing the whole truth about why my wife died. My wife didn't die because of unrequited love. She died because she was brave enough to try to stop corruption. Why didn't you come forward sooner? I asked. Before the trial, before you were convicted. Elena's face was filled with guilt. Because I thought you were guilty. Because I was afraid. Because I was so angry at Sarah for fighting with me, and my pride wouldn't let me do the right thing. For 7 years I lived with that guilt every day. And now, even though I know it's too late, I'm here to give you back everything you lost, to make sure you get what you deserve. Ghost had stopped growling. He was studying Elena with intense focus, his nose working, and I realized he was smelling Sarah's scent on her, the genetic similarity between twins that made them smell almost identical. She loved you, Elena said quietly. Sarah, she loved you so much. She talked about you all the time when we were in contact, before our fight. Said you were the best man she'd ever known, that you made her feel safe and understood. I'm so sorry I didn't protect you the way she would have wanted me to. I stood up slowly, the USB drive clutched in my fist. What was your fight about? The one that made you stop speaking? Elena smiled sadly. She wanted me to leave my abusive husband. I wasn't ready to hear it. I accused her of judging me, of not understanding. I said terrible things. And then she died, and I never got to tell her she was right, that I should have listened. We stood in silence for a long moment, this woman who wore my dead wife's face, and I, the man, who'd been punished for a crime he didn't commit. Behind us, Ghost sat calmly now, accepting Elena's presence. What do you want me to do with this? I asked, holding up the drive. Finish what Sarah started, Elena said. Expose the corruption. Make sure Hartley pays for all of it, not just her murder, but every crime he helped cover up, every criminal he let walk free, every victim whose case he threw. Use Sarah's evidence to tear down the whole rotten system she died trying to fight. I looked at the drive again, then at Elena. Will you testify? About Sarah's investigation? Yes, she said without hesitation. I'll testify to everything I know. It's the least I can do. Ghost stood up and walked slowly toward Elena. She froze, uncertain, but the wolf just sniffed her hand carefully, then her coat, then her face. After a long moment, he sat down in front of her and placed his paw on her boot. It was the same gesture he'd done with Sarah 1,000 times, his way of saying, "You're pack, you're safe." Elena's eyes filled with tears. He remembers, she whispered. He remembers her scent. He never forgets, I said quietly. 6 months later, the trial of William Hartley became the biggest news story Alaska had seen in decades. The murder confession would have been enough to put him away for life. But when Elena's evidence was introduced, Sarah's meticulous documentation of years of corruption, the case exploded into something much larger. 13 other prosecutors and judges were implicated. A criminal organization running drugs and weapons through Alaska was dismantled. Dozens of wrongful convictions were overturned as cases Hartley had touched were reviewed and found to be tainted. Hartley himself received life in prison without parole for Sarah's murder, plus an additional 75 years for corruption, racketeering, and obstruction of justice. I attended the sentencing, sitting in the front row with Elena on one side and Officer Santos on the other. When the judge read the sentence, I felt no satisfaction, no vindication, just a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Justice had been served, but Sarah was still dead. The Sarah and Ghost Foundation for Criminal Justice Reform launched in August, funded by my settlement and donations from people across the country who'd been moved by our story. We'd already helped exonerate 2 innocent people and were funding legal defense for 6 others. Ghost's health declined slowly but steadily. By September, the arthritis had gotten bad enough that long walks were difficult. By October, the kidney disease required daily medication. By November, Dr. Chen gently suggested I start thinking about quality of life decisions. But Ghost was still Ghost, still alert, still affectionate, still watching over me with those pale blue eyes. He'd earned his rest, earned his peace, and I was determined to give him the best final months possible. Elena had become a regular presence in my life. She'd left her husband, started therapy, and was slowly building a relationship with me based on our shared love for Sarah. It wasn't easy. Seeing Sarah's face on someone else never stopped being painful. But Elena wasn't Sarah. She was her own person, with her own story, and she was trying to make amends for years of silence. On December 17th, Sarah's birthday, Elena and I went to the cemetery together with Ghost. The old wolf moved slowly, his limp pronounced, but he insisted on making the journey. We stood at Sarah's grave, the 3 of us, and I placed fresh white roses on the headstone like I did every month. "We finished it," I told Sarah's grave. "The investigation you started, Hartley's in prison, the organization is dismantled, and your foundation is helping others the way you always wanted to help people." Elena added, "I'm sorry I didn't do this sooner, Sarah. I'm sorry for everything, but I'm trying to be brave now, the way you always were." Ghost lay down in the snow next to the headstone, his head on his paws, and closed his eyes. For a moment, I panicked, thinking this was it, thinking he'd chosen this spot to die. But his chest rose and fell steadily. He was just resting. "She's proud of you," Elena said softly, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Wherever she is, she's proud of both of you." I looked at Ghost, my faithful wolf who'd saved my life and helped bring a killer to justice. I looked at Elena, trying so hard to honor her sister's memory. And I looked at Sarah's name, carved in granite, permanent and unchanging. "We did good," I whispered. "Didn't we, Sarah? We did good." A raven called from the spruce tree above, harsh and clear in the cold December air. Ghost's ear twitched at the sound, but he didn't open his eyes. And for the first time in 7 years, I felt something like peace. 3 months later, on a cold March morning, I received a package at the cabin. No return address, just my name and a Montana postmark. Inside was a thumb drive and a handwritten note from Elena. "James, I found this in Sarah's old storage unit. I don't know what it means, but I think you should see it. E." I plugged the drive into my laptop and found a single video file, dated January 16th, 2012, the day before Sarah died. I clicked play. Sarah's face filled the screen, and my heart stopped. She looked worried, frightened even, sitting in what I recognized as her photography studio. "James," she said to the camera, "if you're watching this, it means something happened to me. And if something happened to me, it means I was right about everything." She took a shaky breath. "Hartley isn't the top of this. The corruption goes much higher. State senators, federal judges, people with real power. I've documented all of it, but there are pieces I haven't put together yet. There's someone behind all of this, someone who's been running this operation for over 20 years, someone so well protected that even exposing Hartley might not be enough." Sarah leaned closer to the camera, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I think they know I'm investigating. I think they're watching me. I've been seeing the same car parked near our cabin, getting hang-up phone calls, finding evidence that someone's been in the house when we're gone." My blood ran cold. Someone had been watching her, watching us. "I've hidden copies of everything," Sarah continued. "If anything happens to me, the evidence will come out eventually. But James, if you're seeing this, you need to be careful. These people are dangerous. They've killed before, and they'll kill again to protect their secrets. Don't trust anyone in law enforcement until you know for certain they're clean. And please, please, be safe." She paused, her eyes glistening with tears. "I love you. I love you so much. Take care of Ghost for me, and tell Elena I'm sorry about our fight. Tell her I love her too." The video ended. I sat in shock, Ghost's head heavy on my lap, staring at the frozen image of my dead wife. Hartley was in prison. His network was dismantled. Justice had been served. Except Sarah had just told me, from beyond the grave, that we'd only caught the tip of the iceberg. There was someone else, someone higher up, someone who'd been watching Sarah 20 years, someone who might have ordered her death, someone who was still out there. Ghost raised his head and looked at me with those wise blue eyes. He looked old and weary, but there was still fire in his gaze, still determination. "One more case," I whispered to him. "One more mystery to solve. Can you handle it, old friend?" Ghost's tail thumped the ground once. Together, we caught a killer and exposed a corrupt prosecutor. Together, we would find the mastermind behind this conspiracy and finish the job Sarah started. Because some loyalties don't end with death. Some promises must be kept, no matter how long it takes. And somewhere, I knew Sarah was watching both of us. Justice delayed is justice denied, but the truth always finds its way.